The knock on my door came just after sunrise. I opened it to see my sister standing across the porch, not even saying hello, holding a tiny, wailing bundle. My heart stopped. I had no warning, no explanation. My name is Lila Monroe, and that morning my life changed forever. My sister turned and walked away without a word, leaving her newborn daughter in my arms. I blinked, stunned, as the weight of her decision landed squarely on me. Then my parents appeared behind her, calm and almost indifferent. "She's your burden now," my mother said, as if I had volunteered for this nightmare. I didn't speak. How could I? One moment, my sister was the spoiled, reckless, favorite child, and the next, she had shoved the consequences of her choices into my hands. The baby, tiny, helpless, innocent, cried against my chest, a sound that was both devastating and grounding. I felt anger, disbelief, and a strange flicker of determination. If my parents wanted me to take this responsibility, I would, but on my terms. I wasn't going to let anyone manipulate or shame me, not even my sister, not even my parents. Something had to change. The days that followed were a blur of midnight feedings, endless diapers, and whispered apologies that never came from my sister. She had vanished completely. Calls went unanswered, messages ignored. My parents acted as if it was perfectly normal to drop this responsibility in my lap and walk away. And yet, with every exhausted sigh and every sleepless night, a fire grew inside me. I would prove that I could handle this, that their assumptions about weakness and obligation were wrong, and I would make sure my sister, and maybe even my parents, never underestimated me again. I began documenting everything: my sister's disappearance, the baby's care, and my parents' dismissive attitude, not for revenge yet, but to understand the landscape I was navigating. I had to strategize. Life had thrown me into chaos, but I had one advantage: clarity. Every decision, every step I took for that baby was mine alone, and if anyone thought this burden would break me, they were about to be proven spectacularly wrong. I wasn't just surviving, I was learning to thrive under pressure, quietly, deliberately, and with growing resolve. Neighbors, friends, even coworkers began noticing the change. The baby was beautiful, resilient, and somehow comforting even in chaos. I became fiercely protective, setting boundaries with my parents, limiting interference, and refusing to let anyone dictate how I raised her. My sister's absence left a vacuum, but it also created a space for empowerment I had never felt before. The first sparks of silent vengeance ignited. If my sister could abandon responsibility, I would transform this burden into my own power. Then an email arrived. My sister had left her old phone behind, and among the notifications was a message that chilled me. "I'll be back when it's convenient. Don't mess it up." Convenient, as if raising a child could be paused or delayed at will. My blood boiled, but I took a deep breath. The baby needed calm, not my rage, and that calm, I realized, would be my greatest weapon. Every decision from now on would be deliberate, every move strategic. My sister might have abandoned her daughter, but she had also awakened something in me that would not rest until justice, quiet, sharp, and unstoppable, was mine. The first week was chaos disguised as routine. Feedings, diaper changes, and sleepless nights blurred into each other, but I found a rhythm. With every task, I grew stronger, more confident. My parents' casual dismissal of the situation, "She's your burden now," became fuel. I silently vowed that if my sister thought she could abandon her responsibilities and escape consequences, she had another thing coming. Every decision I made, from doctor visits to baby-proofing the house, became a testament to my independence. I started documenting my sister's absence. Every missed call, every unanswered message, every reminder from my parents that this was now my responsibility was recorded. Not in anger, but in preparation. I didn't know yet how I would use it, but one day I would. Her absence wasn't just inconvenience, it was a mistake. And mistakes, when handled strategically, can have consequences. I was beginning to see the threads of leverage forming, even if they were invisible to everyone else. By the second week, the neighborhood gossip had started. People whispered about my sister disappearing, leaving me with the baby. My parents acted like it was no big deal, but I felt the eyes of the world on me, and I realized something powerful. Perception could be controlled. I began interacting with neighbors and colleagues strategically, presenting calm competence where chaos could have taken over. Every compliment, every subtle acknowledgement of my capability became another quiet step in reclaiming the narrative from my sister and parents. I also discovered her old emails and social media messages, left accessible on the phone. There were glimpses of her excuses for abandoning responsibility, excuses that had failed to reach any adult comprehension. I archived everything, not for revenge yet, but because knowledge is power. Every careless word she had written became a potential tool, and in the weeks to come, I would find ways to turn that power into leverage, turning the child she abandoned into a symbol of my quiet dominance. My parents, of course, continued to interfere, but in small ways, as if to remind me this was my problem. I set boundaries politely but firmly, refusing to let their interference compromise the baby's safety or my control. Every attempt to manipulate me backfired subtly. Their casual comments about responsibility only strengthened my resolve. I began to realize this wasn't just about raising a child. This was about proving that abandonment and favoritism have consequences, and that underestimation can be the most dangerous mistake of all. Then, a call arrived from a distant relative, curious about the baby and suspicious of my sister's sudden disappearance. I shared carefully, presenting a picture of calm competence while hinting at the irresponsibility that had left me in charge. The seeds of perception were planted. My sister's absence was no longer just a personal betrayal, it was visible to others. And as the relative promised to reach out if more information surfaced, I knew the groundwork for her accountability had quietly begun. The baby's cries at my side reminded me that this responsibility was mine, but so was the power it could bring. By the third week, my sister's absence had become a visible gap in the family dynamic. My parents, who had initially dismissed the situation, began to realize that managing a newborn wasn't as effortless as they had assumed. I used their surprise strategically, inviting them to observe my competence without taking over. Every glance, every acknowledgement from them was carefully noted. I was no longer just enduring a burden, they were witnessing that the responsibility I had been forced to bear was transforming me into someone capable, precise, and unshakable. I also began subtle outreach to family friends and neighbors. In casual conversations, I hinted at my sister's irresponsibility without gossiping, presenting facts calmly and with evidence if questioned. Word began to spread about the baby and the sister who vanished, leaving her child behind. This wasn't revenge yet, it was control of the narrative. The public perception shifted quietly, showing that abandonment has consequences, even when the guilty party assumes they can escape accountability. Then came a key opportunity, an overdue school or health enrollment for the baby that required parental approval from both parties. My sister's absence was now a liability. I calmly handled the bureaucratic details, keeping records of her unresponsiveness and my repeated attempts to contact her. My parents, who had insisted she was my burden, could now see the potential legal consequences if I hadn't acted. It was subtle, but the first domino had fallen. Abandonment could no longer be ignored, and I was in control. Meanwhile, my sister continued to attempt contact sporadically, messages that were vague, evasive, and filled with excuses. I documented every interaction. Each ignored message, every delayed response became a point of leverage. My parents noticed the documentation, unsure whether to intervene. I didn't act on impulse, I let the evidence accumulate. Every note, every email, every phone log was another building block in the strategy I had begun to construct, one that would ensure accountability and establish boundaries that my sister had long ignored. As the weeks passed, I realized something important. The real power wasn't in confrontation, it was in consistency, competence, and calm observation. My sister's absence and my parents' dismissiveness had given me a unique opportunity to establish control and authority over the situation. The baby thrived under my care, my parents grew increasingly aware of my capability, and my sister's reputation quietly eroded in ways she could not predict. The subtle shift in power dynamics was irreversible. It only required patience. Finally, a turning point arrived. My sister called in a panic, claiming she wanted to take the baby back. I calmly reviewed her claims and reminded her of the repeated neglect, the missed communications, and the evidence I had meticulously gathered. My parents listened silently, realizing I had positioned myself as the responsible party. The baby's safety and stability were now undeniably in my hands, and any attempt to reclaim control without accountability would fail. The quiet revenge had begun, abandonment could no longer be treated lightly, and I was the one enforcing the consequences. By the 5th week, the dynamic had shifted entirely. My sister's sporadic attempts to contact me were now met with calm, measured responses. I maintained control over all decisions regarding the baby's care, ensuring that any attempt she made to assert authority was met with documented evidence of her previous neglect. My parents, who had once laughed and dismissed the situation, now observed cautiously, recognizing that I had taken full command of a responsibility they had underestimated. I continued leveraging documentation strategically. Every missed message, every avoided responsibility, every small oversight my sister had made now became proof of her unreliability. I communicated carefully with legal advisors and pediatric services, framing my actions as safeguarding the child's well-being. This approach wasn't just about demonstrating competence, it was about creating a framework that would prevent anyone from undoing the stability I had built, including my parents or sister. Neighbors and relatives began to notice the transformation. They commented on my calm authority, my meticulous attention to detail, and the thriving health and happiness of the baby. My sister, who had once mocked me for being too responsible, was now the one struggling to maintain credibility. The first sparks of public accountability were visible, all without confrontation. It was quiet, effective, and completely within my control. Then came the confrontation I had anticipated. My sister returned, insisting she was ready to take responsibility. I listened calmly, reviewed all her excuses, and reminded her of the documented neglect. My parents, who had initially dumped this responsibility on me, realized the truth. I was the one who had managed it successfully. Any attempt by her to regain control would require her to acknowledge the consequences of her choices, something she was clearly unprepared to do. I didn't respond with anger. I responded with strategy. I offered conditional involvement. If she wanted to participate in the baby's life, she had to commit fully, follow documented procedures, and accept accountability for every decision she had neglected. My parents nodded in agreement, silently recognizing that I had not just survived this burden, I had transformed it into leverage, authority, and control. The tables had completely turned. From that moment, the power dynamic was irreversible. My sister's freedom to act recklessly had been replaced with accountability. My parents could no longer dismiss responsibilities they had once laughed at, and I, Lila Monroe, had taken the first-day humiliation of abandonment and transformed it into a clear, undeniable authority. The baby thrived, and I held the reins, not through confrontation, but through calm, consistent, and strategic action. Months passed, and my sister's sporadic involvement in the baby's life was now carefully monitored. Every step she took required documentation, proof of commitment, and accountability. My parents had become allies in ensuring consistency, no longer dismissive or condescending. What had started as abandonment had evolved into a system where responsibility could no longer be ignored. I had turned a burden into control, and every action reinforced the stability I had fought to create. The baby thrived, healthy and happy, surrounded by structure and care. My sister's sporadic, half-hearted attempts to reclaim influence were now irrelevant. I responded calmly, strategically, and with firm boundaries. My parents, who had once shrugged and laughed, now quietly deferred to my judgment. I had proven that competence, patience, and consistency always outshine impulsive neglect. Even the wider family noticed. Relatives who had once questioned my ability now sought advice and guidance. The baby's well-being became a testament to my diligence, patience, and calm authority. The first humiliation, the moment my sister abandoned her child, had sparked a transformation not just in me, but in how everyone perceived responsibility, care, and accountability. Finally, my sister had no choice but to acknowledge the consequences of her actions. Any attempt to interfere without full commitment was met with documented proof of her past negligence. My parents, who had once shrugged and said, "She's your burden now," now recognized that I had turned that burden into undeniable authority. The balance of power had completely shifted, and the first act of abandonment had become the foundation of my control. I had transformed exhaustion into empowerment, chaos into order, and abandonment into leverage. The baby's life was secure. My parents were aware of accountability, and my sister had no way to reclaim influence without meeting the standards I had established. Every whispered doubt, every underestimated capability had been methodically erased by consistent, strategic action. Today, I walk through my home with calm confidence, the baby laughing in my arms. What began as a nightmare of abandonment had become a story of resilience, strategy, and quiet authority. My sister may have left the baby on my doorstep, but she had unwittingly handed me the power to define the rules. She thought abandoning her child would be consequence-free. Now, I am the one shaping every outcome.